I wiped a smudge of flour from my cheek, admiring the massive garlic herb roast resting on my kitchen island, when my phone vibrated with the message that permanently altered my relationship with my daughter. The text from Jessica popped up on the family group chat, bold and unapologetic. Change of plans, everyone. We're celebrating my birthday at the Oakwood Grill downtown instead. Adults only. See you all at 7. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by dirty mixing bowls, roasting pans, and the lingering heat of an oven that had been running since 6 in the morning. I had spent the last 11 hours cooking a massive, multi-course dinner for 13 of our relatives entirely at Jessica's request. She had called me 2 weeks ago using that sweet, persuasive tone she always reserved for when she needed a major favor. She wanted a lavish, home-cooked feast for her 35th birthday. She specifically requested my slow-cooked brisket, 4 different complex side dishes, and a 3-tiered chocolate mousse cake baked completely from scratch. My back ached, my feet were swollen in my comfortable sneakers, and my hands were raw from washing endless dishes. I am 64 years old. Ever since my husband passed away 5 years ago, I have lived quietly in my paid-off home, trying my best to be a supportive mother and grandmother. But looking at that glowing screen, a cold realization settled in my chest. Before I could even process the group text, a private message from Jessica appeared on my screen. Mom Greg's parents really wanted to do a fancy dinner out instead. Just put all that food you made into the fridge. We will swing by tomorrow to pick it up for our weekly meal prep. See you tonight. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the $100 I spent on groceries or the grueling labor I had just endured. She simply assumed I would pack away the fruits of my labor like a hired kitchen hand and quietly follow them to a restaurant. I did not cry. I did not throw a mixing bowl at the wall. I simply stared at the roast, breathing in the scent of rosemary, and realized that my daughter's entitlement had finally crossed a line I could no longer ignore. To understand how we got to this kitchen counter, you have to understand the dynamic that had slowly poisoned my relationship with Jessica and her husband, Greg. When my husband was alive, he kept a very firm lid on Jessica's demanding nature. He was a practical man who believed in earning your way. But after his sudden passing, I was swallowed by grief and loneliness. In my vulnerable state, I let my boundaries slip. I wanted my family close, and Jessica quickly learned how to weaponize my desire for connection. It started small. She would drop off her 2 toddlers at my house on Saturday mornings without warning, claiming she and Greg desperately needed a mental health day. I loved my grandchildren, so I never complained. Then the financial emergencies began. A broken water heater at their house, a sudden repair needed on Greg's truck. Greg was a man who changed jobs as often as he changed his shoes, always blaming his bosses for his own lack of work ethic. Jessica, meanwhile, worked part-time, but spent money like she was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Whenever they fell short, I was the safety net. I paid their utility bills more times than I care to admit. I bought the kids winter clothes. I filled their pantry. Over the past 5 years, my home had slowly transformed from a sanctuary into Jessica's personal free storage unit, free daycare center, and free catering service. I never wanted to be the bitter mother-in-law. I kept my mouth shut, hoping they would eventually mature and find their footing. My older son, Lucas, who lived an hour away, had warned me multiple times. He would sit at this very kitchen island, drinking coffee, and tell me that I was enabling them. I always brushed him off, making excuses for my daughter. But standing here today, feeling the dull ache in my spine from standing over a hot stove since dawn, Lucas's words echoed in my mind. I was not being a supportive mother. I was being used. And the worst part of it all was the small rectangular piece of plastic currently sitting inside Jessica's designer purse. Earlier that morning at around 9 o'clock, Jessica had rushed into my kitchen. I was already elbow deep in bread dough. She looked perfectly manicured, holding a cup of expensive iced coffee. She kissed my cheek and immediately started picking at the fresh fruit I had chopped for the salad. "Everything smells amazing, Mom." She chimed, her eyes darting around the organized chaos of the countertops. "Listen, Greg and I need to run out and grab some extra folding chairs and a few specialty balloons for the dining room. But my bank account is doing that weird pending thing again, and Greg's card is maxed until Friday. Can I just borrow your emergency credit card for an hour? I swear it won't be more than $50. I was distracted trying to keep track of the baking times and temperature adjustments. I wiped my hands on my apron, walked over to my purse, and handed her the blue credit card I kept specifically for household emergencies. I didn't think twice about it. She promised to bring it right back before the guests arrived at 5. Now, looking at the text message time-stamped at 4:30 in the afternoon, the pieces of her little puzzle snapped together with blinding clarity. There were no folding chairs. There were no specialty balloons. Greg's parents had probably suggested a high-end restaurant earlier that week, and Jessica, wanting to impress her in-laws, agreed without hesitation. She never intended to have her birthday dinner at my house. She let me cook for 12 hours because she wanted the free meal prep for her upcoming work week. And she took my credit card this morning because she fully intended to use it to pay for a table of 13 people at one of the most expensive steakhouses in the city. She assumed I would just show up at the restaurant, swallow my pride to avoid a public scene, and let her swipe my card to foot a massive bill. She thought I was a predictable, quiet old woman who would choose peace over standing up for herself. She was wrong. A younger version of myself might have immediately called her. I might have yelled, cried, and demanded an explanation. I might have driven down to that restaurant and caused a loud, dramatic scene in the middle of the dining room. But at 64, I have learned that anger is exhausting, and arguments with irrational people only drain your own energy. When dealing with someone who uses your love as leverage, words are entirely useless. Only actions matter. I picked up my phone. I didn't type out a long paragraph explaining my hurt. I didn't demand an apology for the wasted food or my blistering hands. I simply opened our private text thread and typed a single calm response. "Understood. Enjoy your dinner." I hit send. Then I closed the messaging app and opened my mobile banking application. I navigated to this credit card dashboard, found the blue emergency card currently sitting in Jessica's purse, and tapped the settings icon. There, sitting right at the top of the screen, was the feature my bank had introduced a year ago: the digital lock. With one firm tap of my thumb, the toggle switch slid from green to gray. Card locked. All new transactions will be declined. I set a secondary notification on my banking app, ensuring my phone would ping me the exact moment a transaction was blocked. I placed my phone face down on the cool granite counter. A strange, profound sense of peace washed over me. For 5 years, I had allowed my daughter to dictate the terms of our relationship. I had let her treat my time, my money, and my home as her rightful property. By sliding that digital switch, I was doing more than just protecting my bank account. I was closing the door on the era of being her doormat. But there was still the matter of the incredible feast cooling in my kitchen, and I absolutely refused to let my hard work rot in a plastic container. The brisket was perfectly tender, the glazed carrots were caramelized to perfection, and the chocolate mousse cake looked like it belonged in a bakery window. I grabbed my phone again and dialed my son Lucas. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, I'm just packing up the car to head to your place for Jess's dinner," he said. "Change of plans, Lucas," I replied, my voice steady and light. Jessica decided to take Greg's family to a steakhouse downtown instead. But I still have enough food here to feed a small army. "Are you still coming over?" There was a heavy pause on the line. I could hear his frustration brewing. She made you cook all day and then ditched you. Mom, I am so sorry. I'll call her right now and— No, I interrupted firmly. Do not call her. I am handling it. I just want to know if you and Sarah want to come over and eat this incredible brisket. And bring the kids. In fact, text your neighbors, the Millers. Tell them to come too. Within 30 minutes, my quiet house transformed. Lucas and his wife arrived carrying 2 bottles of good wine. I walked across the street and knocked on the door of my neighbor Betty, a retired school teacher who lived alone, and invited her over. I called 2 of my closest friends from my book club. By 6 o'clock, my dining room was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and genuine appreciation. Betty raved about the side dishes, and my grandchildren happily devoured the chocolate cake. Nobody took the food for granted. Nobody treated me like the hired help. I sat at the head of my own table sipping a glass of Merlot, feeling lighter than I had in years. I wasn't sitting in a loud, pretentious restaurant paying for people who didn't respect me. I was in my own home surrounded by people who genuinely valued my company. And right as Lucas was pouring a second round of wine, my phone sitting quietly on the buffet table lit up with a notification. I picked up the phone and casually glanced at the screen. A push notification from my banking app sat at the top of my lock screen. Transaction declined. The Oakwood Grill. Amount $1, 145 Card locked. A small, quiet smile touched my lips. I slipped the phone into my cardigan pocket and walked back to the table. I could easily picture the scene unfolding downtown. They would have finished their expensive aged steaks, their top-shelf cocktails, and their decadent desserts. The waiter would have brought the leather-bound checkbook. Jessica, playing the role of the generous host in front of her in-laws, would have confidently handed over my blue card, fully expecting my money to maintain her facade of wealth. 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Then again. And again. I stepped into the hallway to check the screen. 3 missed calls from Jessica. 2 missed calls from Greg. Then the frantic text messages started pouring in. Mom, why isn't the card working? Pickup. Mom, this is embarrassing. Call the bank right now, it keeps declining. We are sitting here looking like idiots in front of Greg's parents. Unlock the card immediately. I read every single message. My pulse didn't race. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. She had planned to steal over $1,000 from a widowed pensioner to impress people she barely liked. I swiped the notifications away, turned my phone on silent, and walked back into the dining room to cut another slice of cake for Betty. I later learned from a mutual family friend exactly what happened. The waiter returned the card politely, informing Jessica it was declined. Greg tried his maxed-out card, which was also rejected. Jessica had to swallow her immense pride, look across the table at Greg's wealthy parents, and quietly beg them to cover the $1,200 bill. The embarrassment was absolute. The facade she had carefully constructed was shattered in a matter of seconds. She was trapped in the reality of her own financial choices, with no mother to swoop in and save her. By 10 o'clock that night, my guests had gone home. Lucas stayed behind to help me load the dishwasher and wipe down the counters. He noticed the barrage of text messages lighting up my silenced phone on the counter. She's losing her mind. And isn't she? Lucas asked, tossing a dish towel over his shoulder. She is experiencing the consequences of her own actions, I replied, scrubbing a roasting pan. For the first time in a long time. Are you okay, Mom? He asked softly, genuinely concerned that the stress of the evening might have been too much for me. I am wonderful, Lucas, I said, and I meant it. The chronic, heavy anxiety that usually accompanied my dealings with Jessica was completely gone. The fog had lifted. I finally understood that I held the power in my own life. I owned my home. I controlled my finances. I was the one allowing the disrespect, which meant I was the one who could stop it. After Lucas left, I walked through my quiet, clean house. I went into the spare bedroom, which had become a dumping ground for Jessica's out-of-season clothes and Greg's old sports equipment. I grabbed 3 large garbage bags from the kitchen and methodically began packing everything that belonged to them. I folded the clothes, boxed up the miscellaneous items, and stacked them neatly by the front door. I didn't need to hire a lawyer to reclaim my space. I didn't need to draft a complicated legal eviction notice because they didn't live here. But they had treated my house as their personal annex, and that privilege was officially revoked. I took the spare house key I kept under the decorative rock on the porch and brought it inside. I locked the deadbolt, turned off the porch light, and went to sleep. I slept better that night than I had in half a decade. I knew exactly what the next morning would bring, and I was entirely ready for it. At exactly 8:15 the next morning, heavy, urgent knocking echoed through my front hallway. I was already awake, sitting in my armchair by the window, wearing a comfortable sweater and drinking a hot cup of black tea. I didn't rush. I took a slow sip, set my mug on the coaster, and walked to the door. I opened it to find Jessica and Greg standing on my porch. The contrast between them was striking. Greg looked sheepish, staring at his boots and refusing to make eye contact. Jessica, however, looked unkempt and furious. Her makeup from the night before was smudged, and her face was flushed red with righteous indignation. Before the door was even fully open, she started her performance. "How could you do that to me?" she demanded, stepping forward, intending to push her way into the hallway like she always did. I did not step back. I stood firmly in the doorway, blocking her path. "I had to beg Greg's father to pay for my birthday dinner," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? You ruined my birthday. Why would you cancel your card without telling me what is wrong with you?" I looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw a 35-year-old woman throwing a temper tantrum because her mother wouldn't fund her deceit. "I didn't cancel the card, Jessica." I said, my voice barely above a whisper, entirely void of emotion. "I locked it because you asked to borrow it to buy balloons and folding chairs. You did not ask to borrow it to pay for a $1,000 steak dinner after forcing me to cook for 12 hours. I was going to pay you back," she lied, smoothly crossing her arms. "And the food you made wouldn't go to waste. I told you I was going to take it for lunches." "You aren't taking anything," I replied smoothly. "In fact, you need to hand me my credit card right now." Jessica blinked, clearly thrown off by my calm demeanor. She was ready for a screaming match. She was ready for me to cry, to express guilt, to fold under her anger like I usually did. My cold detachment left her completely off balance. "Mom, stop being dramatic," she huffed, digging into her designer purse and pulling out my blue credit card. She held it out, but didn't let go immediately. "Greg's dad expects us to pay him back by Friday. You need to unlock this so I can transfer him the money, and then we can talk about this." I reached out, grasped the edge of the card, and pulled it firmly from her fingers. I slipped it into my pocket. "You and Greg will figure out how to pay his father back with your own paychecks," I said calmly. "My finances are no longer available to you. My kitchen is no longer your personal catering service, and my home is no longer your storage unit." I stepped back, reached behind the door, and pushed the 3 large garbage bags full of their belongings out onto the porch, right at Greg's feet. Greg finally looked up, his eyes wide. "What is this?" Jessica asked, her voice, dropping the anger suddenly replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. "These are your things from the spare room," I said. "I am reclaiming the space. Furthermore, I will no longer be available for free babysitting on weekends. If you want to visit, you will call ahead and you will knock. You do not have a key anymore." "Mom, you can't be serious." Jessica stammered, the reality of her lost safety net crashing down on her. "You're overreacting." over one dinner. It was never just about the dinner, Jessica, I replied. It was about respect. And since you cannot respect me as your mother, you will learn to respect me as an adult, setting her boundaries. Goodbye. I shut the heavy wooden door quietly, engaging the deadbolt with a solid, satisfying click. For the first few weeks, Jessica tried every tactic in her playbook. She sent guilt-tripping text messages, she had Greg call me to plead poverty, and she even tried dropping the kids off unannounced on a Saturday. When that happened, I simply did not open the door. I watched through the window as she stood on the porch, confused and frustrated, before finally strapping the kids back into her SUV and driving away. I missed my grandchildren, of course, but I knew that if I caved, nothing would ever change. I had to endure the temporary discomfort of distance to establish a permanent foundation of respect. It took 2 months for the reality to truly sink in for her. Without my bank account to cover their shortfalls, Greg was forced to take a stable, full-time job managing a warehouse and actually keep it. Without my free weekend childcare, Jessica had to budget her time and money carefully. They couldn't afford expensive dinners out, and they certainly couldn't afford to treat people poorly. Eventually, the angry texts stopped. 6 months after the birthday incident, Jessica called me. Her tone wasn't demanding, and it wasn't coded in fake sweetness. It was simply tired and humble. She asked if she and the kids could come over for Sunday lunch. She offered to bring the groceries. I said yes. We don't have a perfect relationship now. I still keep my finances entirely private, and the spare room has been permanently converted into my painting studio. But when Jessica comes over, she cleans up after her children, she says thank you, and she never asks for my credit card. Taking control of my life didn't require legal battles or bitter revenge. It just required me to realize my own worth, lock a piece of plastic, and close a door. I spent years thinking that giving my daughter everything was the only way to keep her close. I learned that saying no was the only way to actually save us both.